Hello, my name is Sam Burns, and I'm a recent graduate from Moody Aviation. A couple of years ago, I was working as an administrator and CFO, Chief Financial Officer, for a healthcare company in southern Arizona when God began to put it on mine and my wife's heart to consider making a change and pursuing a career in missionary aviation. I began talking to people in the missionary aviation world, and I asked about how to get trained for this. I knew that missionary aviation was not something you wanted to show up on the field unprepared for, and I wanted to know how to get the best training possible for this brand of flying. Also, being a CFO, I was very keen on the cost issue. I wanted to figure out just how much this training would cost and whether or not we could make it work financially. As we talked to people across the field of mission aviation, it became quite clear that Moody Aviation was the best place to get trained for this type of work. Other schools were also proposed as possible good options, but it was made clear by multiple people across several different aviation organizations that if we could get our training at Moody Aviation, that would be the best. The next step was to evaluate the cost. I knew at this point that I wanted to attend Moody Aviation, but I was still wanting to compare costs across the other options. This is where we ran into a lot of confusion. As you may have found, when you research aviation school costs, it is difficult to identify just how much the training will actually cost you. Flight time cost, airplane rental cost, airplane rental with a CFI cost, biblical studies cost, housing. Recently, one of our team members here at Moody Aviation, recognizing that this is a challenge for anyone considering this type of training, took on the hard work himself of tracking down just how much this training would cost at various aviation schools. And we have compiled that data, and I will present it to you in this presentation. We're going to look at how Moody compares across compared to multiple other training facilities in the United States that provide a similar type of training. We're going to consider things from a cost perspective. And in so doing, also, we hope to give you a very transparent look at what you can expect to pay here at Moody Aviation and why we believe Moody presents to you one of your best value options for getting trained for missionary aviation flight and maintenance. If that sounds like something you're looking for, then you're in the right place, and let's get started. Here is a sneak peek of where we will wind up. By the end of this video, I will unpack each of the color-coded areas in the graph. But before we begin, here is a disclaimer. The data is not perfect. To find these numbers, we really had to dig. We had to run calculations, make phone calls, interpolate, etc. But we have done our best to present you as accurate of a picture as possible. Moody Aviation recognized that we're not always the best option for every student, but we do try to do our best to prepare aviators for the mission field with as minimal an impact on finances as possible. The cost data that you will see from Moody is pulled straight from our course catalog cost worksheet, a document which is frequently updated and made available to the public on our website. Before we talk numbers, let's talk about what missionary aviation training entails. When I first started down this road, I thought that all I needed to do was get my private pilot's license and then show up for duty on foreign soil. And as I mentioned before, I was very wrong. Comprehensive missionary aviation training encompasses not only flight training, but also aviation maintenance training and Bible training. And the flight training is not just a private pilot license, but also endorsements like tailwheel, complex, and high performance, and additional ratings like your IFR rating. A commercial pilot license is also a standard requirement for almost any missionary aviation organization. On the maintenance side, you will need to find a way to get your airframe and power plant licenses. These are maintenance licenses. This is an investment of time and resources, but it is a key part of your pre-field training. Figuring out exactly how much this costs can be a challenge, but we will help you make sense of it today. Most missionary aviation organizations also require some training in biblical studies. At most Christian education institutions like Moody, you can get your Bible training in-house. If you go to a non-Christian school, you will have to get that training elsewhere. Now, when it comes to how we decided who to compare our costs to, here are the criteria we use for building our comparison tool. We are only looking at US-based degree-granting institutions. All our numbers are based on out-of-state tuition numbers as well. We looked at schools that provide comparable flight experience to what Moody Aviation provides. Our numbers here are based on the 2021 to 2022 school year catalog tuition, fees, flight hours, and degree requirements, or otherwise published rates that we were able to locate when we did our research in 2022. The numbers in this presentation will vary in future years, but not by much. This information in this video will still be relevant for years into the future, as the goal of this video is to show you the overarching value proposition that you can expect at Moody Aviation. As you go down this road, however, it will be important that you do get the latest version of the course catalog from our website when you build your own personal training budget. It may be worth noting that our numbers here do not include the cost of health insurance. Okay, so for the purpose of this presentation, you may have been hoping we would, but we are not going to share the names of the schools that we chose, but we will share what kind of schools they are. We've compared Moody Aviation to other well-known private and state schools, and as I mentioned before, these are all U.S. degree-granting institutions. The first cost bucket we will look at is the total cost of books, fees, and tuition spent on flight training courses. A lot of your flight training will be in the classroom learning things like flight theory, regulations, meteorology, and navigation. The numbers presented on this slide are all the flight training costs excluding the actual cost of flying the plane. We will add those numbers in later. I do want to point out that this does not include summer tuition. During our research, we found that some flight programs are demanding enough that students end up needing to fly through the summer, in which case they are then charged a summer tuition. At Moody Aviation, while our program is quite demanding, our published costs in our catalog include all tuition. Now let's add in the tuition for maintenance courses required in pursuit of your airframe and power plant maintenance licenses. All right, here I want to talk about maintenance training lab fees, and you can see that I've added in the A&P, the purple cost bucket there. Often a course will charge both tuition and a lab fee. The tuition is easy to calculate, but lab fees are not always clearly published or easy to find. You need to be sure, no matter who you're talking to school-wise, to ask about lab fees. One school that we spoke with told us that they would not tell us what the lab fees were for their A&P course until after we sent in an application. So for a couple of the schools here, the cost that I'm showing you does not include their lab fees. We were able to confirm that additional lab fees would apply, but that data was not published or accessible, so your overall cost for A&P training at those schools might be more than what I'm showing you here. It might be the same, but it most certainly will not be less. You should also ask if the fees include a toolbox and tools. At Moody, the cost of our lab fees covers both of those. And it's a pretty cool toolbox, if I might add. If you choose to attend a school that does not offer an A&P program, you will need to get that training elsewhere after you graduate, and we can estimate that here now. I'll add those in. Here we've added an estimate of the cost to attend a one-year A&P program plus room and board for that year. And that's added to the schools that didn't otherwise provide A&P training. So you would have to switch schools, get that A&P training at a different school than the one where you got your flight degree. In this slide, I've added in the cost that goes with training at Moody Aviation. This is an added cost here at Moody. And that is the tuition and fees for Moody's advanced maintenance training. At Moody, you complete your A&P training before you begin your flight training. And once you move into the flight training section of the program, you will still have an ongoing advanced maintenance training alongside your flight training. This is where pilots build additional proficiency as a mechanic by working on live aircraft and various advanced shop projects. This also includes a turbine engine familiarization course. The reason this additional maintenance training and experience is built into our flight program goes back to the foundation of our program. We are focused on training missionary aviators. This focus extends to the types of projects students work on during their A&P training. The same goes for Bible training at Moody Aviation, which we will look at next. Our biblical studies courses are specially tailored to that which will best equip someone for missionary aviation ministry. Here are the books, fees, and tuition costs for the schools that offer Bible training. For those that do not offer these courses, you will need to get that training after graduation. And here we've added in the cost of Bible training if you opt to attend a school that does not otherwise have that training. You'll notice that those added costs for those schools are quite a bit smaller compared to the cost of Bible training at the aviation schools that do offer Bible training. This is because we are showing the cost for just 15 hours of Bible, which is really the bare minimum required by most missionary sending organizations. Schools like Moody tend to offer quite a bit more than just 15 credits, and therefore the Bible cost bucket there is a little bit higher at schools like Moody that have their own in-house Bible training. The final tuition item that we need to add here in this kind of category that we're talking about is the Gen Ed classes. Now, this represents 30 hours of general education classes here, pulled from the total hours required for the degree. The only reason these costs vary is because each school sets their hourly tuition rate. It is worth noting that Moody's total tuition costs so far are the lowest on here. Let me assure you that it is not because we are just offering the least amount of training and credit hours. On the contrary, because of Moody's lower cost per credit hour, we can deliver even more content and coursework amounting to what is effectively a triple major in Bible, aircraft maintenance, and flight. Now, that wraps up our tuition overview, but we're not done yet. Another major cost that we need to consider is room and board. Here, we added in the estimated cost of room and board plus meals for a single student. This represents 5 years at Moody and 4 years everywhere else. The main reason that Moody's costs in this area are lower despite it covering 5 years rather than 4 is because Moody Aviation uses a community living model. While we're not able to have dorms on the airport due to FAA regulations, Friends of Moody Aviation have purchased homes within walking distance of the airport, which are dedicated to students of Moody Aviation and are staffed by Moody Housing Advisors. The final item to add in this flight training, in this section here, is the flight training costs. Now, this is not to be confused with the tuition for the flight courses. This fee schedule noted here as rental includes flight lab fees, airplane rental, airplane fuel, and flight instructor fees, which are often referred to as dual. When your flight instructor is on board, that's called dual. As I mentioned before, there were some schools that we found during our research that do not publish all their costs related to flight training. For certain schools, not all the flight costs I list here include fuel surcharge or lab fees. They do, however, all include dual, which is the cost of the flight instructor riding along with you in the plane. One school that we researched appeared to not include any fuel in their costs. This is known as a dry aircraft rental rate. At least one other school had additional flight fees, but they were not published. So as you consider the info on this chart, understand that those light blue boxes may in fact be larger than depicted here. When you talk to other schools, make sure that you are asking about these things. For the sake of this video, we are trying to do our best to give you an apples to apples comparison. So to do that, we actually removed some of the flight training costs from other schools. The other schools all included their flight instructor license course, the CFI as it's commonly known, or their multi-engine certification course, or both, as part of their degree program. We took those costs out of the flight training costs for those for their schools on this chart. Moody does not require CFI or multi to be included to obtain the degree, but rather we offer those as elective courses. We do this because our program is focused on training missionary aviators, not airline pilots. CFI and multi-engine training can be added on to a student's training plan at Moody depending on the pilot's unique situation, which is typically driven by what mission organization and country that they will be serving in. For us to leave those costs in for the other schools would artificially inflate their flight costs and not make it a fair comparison to Moody's degree track. It's worth noting, though, that when you do your own research, ask the schools what their full degree program includes and consider whether you need everything that they will require you to do. If you can compare notes with the mission organization that you hope to join and see if it aligns with what they will want you to have training in, that's even better. Now, one final thing I want to discuss on this slide is that the numbers shown here reflect the minimum flight cost. Because of government regulations, schools are required to list their minimum flight costs to complete their program. That number can be very deceiving for a student trying to plan out finances and training. It is extremely rare for anyone to complete their training close to the minimum hours required. Always ask for the average flight hours and costs. For example, look at the minimum flight costs of the first state school and see how it rises right now when I switch to average costs. Notice that there was nearly a $20,000 jump in costs when we go from minimum cost to average cost. The reality of flight training is that it takes everyone a different amount of time to learn and master certain things in the air. Very few pilots in training can come in and do it in the minimum number of hours required. This average cost graph gives a much better representation of the flight training costs to expect at each school. As we consider the flight costs, you also need to ask the question of what type of aircraft you will be training in and how many hours of flight training you'll be receiving for that cost. Keep that in mind as we move ahead. So here's the straight answer to what does it take to get a degree, flight training, A&P license, and Bible training. We have covered all the major cost items, and you can see here how they total up. For anyone thinking that this looks like a lot of money, you're right, it is. There's no way around that. If you are wondering if a college degree is really all that valuable for overseas missions, let me encourage you with this. Over the last 10 years, the major mission aviation organizations have communicated to us over and over that without a college degree, it is becoming increasingly difficult to obtain a visa to serve in many countries where mission aviation is needed. And setting the college degree issue aside, there is much more to think about as you plan your training. Beyond just the college degree and a few certificates, what is the value that you are receiving in this training? As you will see, not all flight training is the same. Now, there are many ways to measure the value of your training. One simple measure that likely comes to your mind is number of flight hours. When you graduate, how many flight hours will you have to your name? Like how we talked about minimum cost versus average cost, we want to do the same here. We want to look at average hours at graduation, not minimum hours allowed to graduate. Here we have the average flight hours graduates have coming out of each of the schools that we're looking at today. Again, this does not include CFI or multi-engine training, even if it is in their 4-year program. So per our discussion on that subject earlier in this video, we've pulled those hours out so that we have a really, truly even comparison here. As you can see, on average, Moody graduates have between 300 and 350 hours of total flight time when they graduate. And while that is impressive, let's dive even deeper. Not all flight hours are the same. When you apply to a mission aviation organization, they will most likely ask you how much time you have in a high-performance airplane. High-performance airplanes are airplanes with engines that produce more than 200 horsepower. Given that mission organizations often use high-performance aircraft around the world, this type of experience, this is what the mission organizations care about. Pilots hoping to join a mission aviation organization will be required to do a technical evaluation with the missionary organization that they want to join. And during this week-long evaluation, they will be evaluated on their ability to, among other things, manage a high-performance aircraft. And this is something that really matters, and you need to be prepared well in this area. So on this slide, the purple bars represent the average number of high-performance hours that you can plan to receive at these schools. Unfortunately, many of the schools have stopped offering high-performance training. This is not the case at Moody, where high-performance training is a major component of our curriculum. We use high-performance aircraft extensively, and we fly them in and out of mountain airstrips in Washington, Idaho, and even Montana. Students will fly the Cessna 182, 185, and 206. They will gain experience flying complex aircraft, technically advanced aircraft, and tailwheel aircraft. These are each training areas and experiences that are most beneficial to future missionary pilots. Now let's compare these flight hours that the average student graduates with to the total cost that we came up with earlier. So the orange bar here represents the total cost of training. The green bar represents the average number of flight training hours students graduate with, and the purple bar still represents the high performance time. I think that this image really tells the story of the value offered here at Moody Aviation. At the beginning of the video, I told you that our heart here at Moody is to equip missionary aviators to qualify for their field of service with a minimum of debt, and as you can see, we do that pretty well. At this point, I'd like to highlight a few features at Moody, of Moody, that make it possible for us to offer so much for the least amount. First, about half of the staff here at Moody is made up of missionaries on loan to Moody Aviation. You notice that Moody's overall cost was much lower than other schools, and on-loan missionaries are one major reason why. On-loan missionary team members raise funds from donors to pay their salary. The expenses associated with the on-loan team members are not passed along to students. In addition to reducing the debt load on our students, our on-loan missionaries bring massive value and experience to our training. The average experience of our training staff is much higher than you will find at a typical flight school, where most of the CFIs are recent graduates that are looking to build their hours before they move on to the airlines. Moody partners with several different mission aviation organizations in determining what the training should look like here at Moody. The students are exposed to missional opportunities throughout their time here, and they will frequently be rubbing shoulders with missionary aviators from all over the world. But even more important is the real-world mission aviation experience that our staff brings as they mentor us as students. Along those lines, if there is a specific missionary aviation organization that you're interested in, consider connecting with them and asking their perspective on which schools might be a good fit for you. As I mentioned before, I did that personally, and it was very helpful in helping me determine what my true options were for this training. Another Moody Aviation feature that will speed your path up to getting onto the field and lower your expenses is something that is called an early TE. TE stands for Technical Evaluation. Any pilot wanting to join a mission organization can expect to go through that mission's technical evaluation. It usually lasts 1 or 2 weeks and tests areas of maintenance skills, piloting skills, and other personal character of the individual being evaluated. There are prerequisites for taking a TE, the hardest one usually being that missions typically require a minimum amount of flight hours, usually 400 to 500 hours. This is certainly a barrier to anyone who finishes flight training with only 300 to 350 hours. They're going to need to find a way to build up more flight time in order to be eligible for a TE with a mission organization. At an average of $200 an hour, which is a low average, this time building winds up costing at least another $20,000 to $40,000 in flight costs. However, because of the trusted quality of the Moody training program, when you get a recommendation from Moody Aviation, a Moody graduate can immediately apply for an early TE with the flight time they have upon graduation from Moody. So instead of finding a way to build a 100 to 200 more hours after graduation, students bypass this prerequisite and connect directly with a mission organization. They can then move forward under mission supervision as a supported missionary. And while every pilot needs to meet the operational requirements to serve on the field, their final training with the mission they join will often meet those requirements. Mission organizations have invested heavily into shaping and refining Moody Aviation's training. They have shared with us that graduates of other schools have a pass rate of about 70% on the TE, and that Moody graduates have a pass rate of around 90%. An early TE is a big deal. It clears away one of the largest barriers between being a trained pilot and actually flying with a mission. The last major barrier that I want to discuss today that graduates face after graduation is, unfortunately, student loan debt. Very few people come to college prepared to pay out of pocket for even Moody Aviation's training costs. Student loan debt can quickly become a burdensome factor for students. In addition to their other debt relief items we discussed here, Moody also provides a robust financial aid program. We recently surveyed our graduating class to determine sources and amounts of financial aid they received over their 5 years at Moody Aviation, and the findings were interesting. On average, they received $57,000 in financial aid. Again, it's the average cumulative over 5 years in each category. This is not how much each student received every year. While we have to charge the students what it costs, we work very hard to provide ways to defray the costs that they have and train them to raise support while they are here. This includes training students to write prayer letters and build a support-based team. As a result of those prayer letters, funding also comes directly to the students, which is great, but because it goes directly to them, we don't have that data. We have observed that for many, that is a significant portion of their funding. So the numbers shown here do not include any funding sent directly to the students from their financial supporters. One of the largest categories you'll see here is the FLAPS funding. This represents Moody's forgivable loan program. These are loans offered to students that become fully forgivable if they serve with an approved faith-based mission organization following their graduation. And the last item that we will add to this graphic here is non-forgivable student loans. These are typically low-interest federal student loans. The average amount of non-forgivable debt in our survey was less than $10,000. So out of the costs that the average student needed to cover, they were using on average less than $10,000 in loans to fund their training over the course of 5 years that they were here at Moody. I should note though that we do anticipate this average will grow to around $30,000 for future years. This is simply due to the higher quality federal loans becoming more and more available. Going forward, students who would have paused their training to raise up more funds will be more likely to go with one of these new loan alternatives and continue their training as planned. You can see here how these different funding support amounts impact the total costs. The mission organizations recognize that most aviation candidates will have some debt, and they will have policies and procedures for how they address that. Some organizations even have a debt reduction program. I'd encourage you to reach out to any of the ministries that you are interested in and see where they are at on this. I have already mentioned that you should ask about hidden lab fees for maintenance and flight courses, and that you should ask for the average flight hours that a student graduates with, not just the minimum. Another critical question to ask is, what is the average amount of debt an aviation student graduates with? In some ways, this question factors in all those hidden fees. More than fees, you might be asking yourself how to factor in the scholarships that schools might offer you. And some of them might sound like really big scholarships. Asking about average debt at graduation factors in even those scholarships into one simple answer. Always ask about the average debt upon graduation. Typical answers that we have heard for other schools range from $80,000 to $200,000 of debt. So this brings us back to our original question of what does it take to get trained as a missionary pilot? It's an important question you ask and one with huge implications. Cutting corners in training might reduce costs, but it may also lead to having insufficient skills required to pass a technical evaluation in order to join a mission. On the other hand, paralyzing debt often keeps well-trained pilots from reaching the mission field. The data demonstrates that Moody provides the lowest total program cost for the best value, and graduates complete with the lowest average non-forgivable debt of $10,000 to $30,000 versus $80,000 to $200,000 from other schools, which is reflective of our heart to equip missionary aviators to qualify for their field of service with minimum debt. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope it's been helpful to see an apples-to-apples comparison of the various costs associated with different aviation training programs. I also hope that you feel more equipped to ask well-informed questions as you consider the actual cost of attending any school. Here we have listed for you the top 4 questions that you should be asking. That wraps it up for now. If you have any further questions, we would love to talk them through with you. You can also visit us online at moody.edu/aviation. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to see you here at Moody Aviation in the near future.